Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Today, we're diving into some really fascinating core philosophies, psychological frameworks, and even spiritual inquiries brought to us by a creator named Yasminn on our YouTube channel just to see what happens. You know, we live in this society that is just utterly obsessed with hustle culture, right? We're constantly told to grind, push through, and basically outrun any negative feelings. But what if those heavy emotions we're trying so desperately to escape, things like deep sadness, guilt, or even just the need for absolute stillness, what if they aren't malfunctions at all, but actual literal biological necessities? Let's unpack this delicate balance between stasis and action.
Okay, let's jump right into the deep end here. Yasminn presents a pretty radical core philosophy. She argues that sadness is biologically designed to drop your physical energy. It's not a mistake, it is a highly evolved mechanism. It physically pulls you inward, making it so much harder to focus on the noisy external world, literally forcing you to stop and look at what's going on inside.
But, I have to push back just a little bit here. We have to ask a really tough question. Are we romanticizing sadness just a bit too much? Like, in our quest to find deep meaning in every single negative emotion, do we run the risk of sliding into complete paralysis? It's a real dialectic debate. On one hand, sure, sadness is a vital tool. But on the other hand, if we just indulge it without any boundaries, it can absolutely trap us.
Which brings us to Section 1, the myth of malfunction and how we reframe sadness.
As a society, we're so quick to pathologize sadness. We treat it like a glitch in our operating system that needs an immediate software patch, usually by distracting ourselves, scrolling into a dopamine loop, or just staying crazy busy. But Yasminn offers this really crucial caveat to her usual message of taking action. She points out that true aligned action actually demands periods of complete stasis. And to be clear, stasis isn't just doing nothing. It's this profound inner stillness, which is often triggered by that heavy blanket of sadness, and it is absolutely required before any meaningful forward-moving action can ever happen.
Yeah, but there's a very fine line here. We have to be warned about the duality of this. The incredible utility of sadness is that it forces reflection. It acts like a spotlight on our unfulfilled values. The danger, though, well, staying heavy for too long can drag you right into a paralyzing depressive loop. It can even make you super susceptible to systemic control. So we really have to navigate this mental space with incredible care.
Let's move on to Section 2, the biology of the energy drop.
To really understand this, we have to connect the philosophy to our physical reality, because our bodies literally keep the score. When an experience is just too overwhelming for your brain to process in the moment, your brain essentially says, nope, I don't have time for this right now, I just need to survive. And it files that trauma away physically. It gets stored deep in our connective tissue, the fascia, and even right in the psoas muscles in our hips. So when sadness drops your energy, it's actually forcing a physical withdrawal so you can process what got hidden away. In fact, intentionally slow, almost awkwardly slow physical movement is often exactly what helps us finally release that trapped somatic tension.
And honestly, this just brilliantly illustrates the true mechanism of heavy emotions. Sadness isn't a failure of your mindset. It's a biological program literally pulling you inward, forcing you to do the reflection you've been actively avoiding with all your speed and busyness.
All right, Section 3, decoding unfulfilled values.
So, once our biology successfully forces us into stasis, what exactly are we supposed to be looking for? Well, interestingly enough, Yasminn notes that sadness isn't always a requirement for growth. A lot of times, it hits us so hard because it acts as life's last resort alarm. Like, we only feel this crushing heaviness because we've successfully ignored our intuition, blasted past our boundaries, and basically put black tape over all our earlier biological check engine lights.
When you finally force yourself to sit with that heavy sadness, the fog does eventually clear, and it reveals what's broken underneath. Usually, it points to a core value that's been compromised, or it highlights a deep need you've been completely neglecting. It might even expose a false expectation, like waiting around for someone else to come fulfill your needs. Or maybe it shows you a boundary that people keep crossing. Basically, sadness acts as an internal compass, but it only works if you stop running long enough to actually read it.
Yasminn uses this absolutely beautiful metaphor from Taoist philosophy called the empty boat. So imagine you're rowing a boat on a foggy lake and suddenly another boat crashes right into you. Instantly, you're furious at the driver, right? But then you look closer and the boat is totally empty. It just drifted into you. Suddenly, your anger dissolves because there's no one there to blame.
We do this all the time. Our minds create these elaborate narratives, blaming external factors, the empty boats of life, for our sadness. But sitting with the heaviness reveals the real truth. The compass is internal. The hard work of fulfilling your needs, that belongs entirely to you.
Let's turn to Section 4, the paralysis trap. Now, we kind of need to flip the coin and look at the highly destructive side of prolonged stasis. Yasminn offers this very vulnerable, explicit warning against giving into sadness too deeply. While stasis is absolutely meant to be a temporary state for inner reflection, if you leave it unchecked, it can easily morph into permanent stagnation. It becomes this really vicious depressive loop. As she powerfully puts it, the deeper I allow myself to sink, the harder it becomes to crawl back to myself, to life, to reality. While stasis definitely gives you the answers you need, staying in it means you'll have to exert a massive, draining amount of effort to eventually escape. Basically, you can visit your sadness, but you really cannot set up camp there.
Moving right along to Section 5, guilt, shame, and systemic stagnation.
If we zoom out to a societal level for a second, it reveals another genuinely terrifying reason why staying stuck in paralysis is so dangerous. Modern systems and algorithms, they actually thrive on our collective fear, guilt, and shame. Think about it. When we're constantly bombarded with global crises, we feel incredibly heavy. We start feeling guilty for experiencing any sliver of joy while the world is burning. But here's the catch. These heavy emotions keep entire populations hypervigilant, exhausted, and fundamentally stagnant. A paralyzed individual is incredibly easy to control. So instead of facing reality and taking action, we retreat into these isolating dopamine loops on our phones. It's kind of terrifyingly similar to the drug Soma from Brave New World.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. Indulging in heavy emotions, like a paralyzing guilt over world crises, it serves absolutely no one. Your guilt does not stop a war. Your guilt isn't feeding anyone. Lightness, hope, and true vitality, those are the actual fuels required to impact reality and create meaningful resistance. You just cannot pour from an empty, paralyzed cup.
And finally, Section 6, balancing action with stasis.
So how in the world do we reconcile this biological need to stop and feel with the very real danger of getting trapped in a paralyzed, controllable loop? Well, it all comes back to a dynamic balance. You literally cannot achieve Yasminn's favorite state of curious action without first doing the quiet, sad, and often really uncomfortable work of inner alignment. Think of it like breathing. Stasis is the inhale, action is the exhale. You absolutely need both.
Let's break this down into a really practical framework for when that heaviness inevitably hits. Step 1. Do not run. Just sit with the stasis and actually allow that biological energy drop to happen. Step 2. Look right past all those empty boats and identify the unmet value or boundary hiding underneath your mind's external narrative. And step 3. The very second you have your answer, you have to take conscious micro-actions, just tiny, manageable steps to protect yourself from sinking too deep into that paralysis trap.
At the end of the day, your heavy emotions are not a mistake. They are a profound, deeply embedded biological intelligence trying its hardest to guide you back to yourself. But remember, they are a compass, not a destination. So I want to leave you with this one thought to reflect on. How long have you been running on autopilot, just slapping tape over your own biological check engine lights? Maybe it's time to finally hit the brakes, sit in the stillness, and, just see what happens.
Usually, when you're talking about a medical diagnosis, there's this deep comfort in the precision of it all.
Oh, for sure. It's very binary.
Right. It operates almost like engineering. Like
Yeah.
if you fall off a bike and your arm hurts, you go get an x-ray and boom, there's that jagged white line on the film.
Yeah, the doctor just points at it and says, there's the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's totally binary. The bone is broken
Right.
or it's not broken. You put a cast on it and you know exactly how it's going to heal.
We've really craved that visibility, don't we? I mean, we've built our entire medical and honestly, our psychological infrastructure around this idea. Like if we can categorize a malfunction, we can just prescribe a mechanical fix for it.
But then you step into the world of neurodevelopment or, emotional processing and trauma, and that whole x-ray machine just shatters. The diagnostic landscape gets incredibly murky.
Oh.
You can't just take an MRI of someone's deep, sudden sorrow and point to a jagged white line.
And, well, that brings us to the core of what we're unpacking today. We're wading into the deep end of these muddy waters for today's deep dive, looking at the philosophies of a YouTuber named Yasminn from her channel, just to see what happens.
Yeah, and if you follow her work, you're probably pretty familiar with her usual stance on life. She is a massive proponent of action.
Right, very action-oriented.
She advocates for treating your life like you're a scientist in a laboratory, right?
Yeah.
Just constantly experimenting, taking leaps of faith, moving forward.
She's definitely the person telling you to take the risk.
Exactly.
Huh.
But in the sources we're dissecting today, she introduces this really profound caveat to all that action. She argues that this forward momentum, this, constant scientific experimentation with your life, it strictly has to be balanced with stasis.
Which is fascinating. It is. She makes this case that sadness, specifically, is not a glitch in your human system. It's not like a malfunction or a bug in your software. It is a highly evolved biological necessity for inner alignment.
And just think about how counterintuitive that is for us, especially living in this hyperproductive Western culture. We treat sadness as an inconvenience.
Oh, a massive inconvenience.
Right. It's a problem you need to solve immediately so you can just get back to producing. But Yasminn is asking, what happens if your moments of deep sorrow or, that profound, heavy exhaustion that hits you at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday?
Yeah, out of nowhere.
Right, out of nowhere. What if those are actually biological tools specifically designed by evolution to force you to stop, withdraw, and realign your life?
It's a total paradigm shift. Viewing heavy emotions as necessary biological interventions rather than failures of character, it fundamentally alters how we interact with our own minds.
Yeah.
And Yasminn frames this beautifully with a personal anecdote.
Oh, the crying one, right?
Yeah. She talks about feeling this sudden, completely inexplicable urge to cry. And her immediate knee-jerk reaction was to rationalize it as a mechanical error.
She starts blaming her biology in this really dismissive way. Like she thinks it must be PMS or maybe her B12 vitamin levels have just bottomed out.
I think she even jokes about blaming astrology at one point.
Yes. She's like, the moon must be in the wrong phase. She's desperately searching for any external technical reason to explain why her body is doing something so, inconvenient.
And that word inconvenient is the linchpin here, really. She traces this back to her upbringing, noting that showing sadness or anger caused turmoil and stress in her household growing up.
Right.
Displaying heavy emotions made her feel less lovable, less safe. She internalized this idea that she had to be an easy person to earn affection.
And honestly, our society trains us for this from the moment we enter kindergarten. We're taught that a functioning, responsible adult is consistently stable, consistently productive, and outwardly positive.
Always smiling.
Exactly. If you're deeply sad, you're breaking the unspoken social contract. You become a burden. So blaming your B12 levels is an incredibly convenient cultural shield.
It's so much easier.
It is. It's far more acceptable to tell a friend or a boss, oh, I'm just biologically deficient today and need a supplement, than it is to look them in the eye and say, I am carrying a profound, unnameable sadness that's demanding my full attention.
Right, nobody says that. And that cultural conditioning is exactly what Yasminn had to actively unlearn through therapy. She had this massive revelation that every single emotion we experience has a distinct evolutionary biological purpose. They aren't just random atmospheric weather events in the brain.
So let's break down the mechanics of those emotions, because the contrast she draws in the sources is really fascinating. Take anger, for example.
Okay.
The biological purpose of anger is to force you to move forward and alter your immediate situation.
Yeah, anger is an incredibly high energy state. It just floods the nervous system with adrenaline and cortisol. Evolutionarily speaking, it prepares the physical body for a fight.
It gets you ready to go.
Exactly. It increases your heart rate, pushes blood to your extremities, narrows your focus. It acts as this blazing red signal that a boundary has been crossed, and it gives you the immediate physical and psychological fuel required to push back and change the environment.
And anxiety operates on a really similar high-energy frequency, doesn't it?
It does.
Yasminn explains that anxiety triggers survival mode. It signals a life or death threat to your nervous system. In our ancestral environment, that might have been, a predator. But today, the nervous system can't tell the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a looming deadline from your boss.
Or an awkward text message you need to send.
Yes. The physical manifestation of anxiety is hypervigilance. Your muscles tense up, your breathing becomes shallow and rapid, preparing you to either flee or freeze.
It's the body screaming, pay attention to this specific external threat because your survival depends on it. Both anger and anxiety are mechanisms of external engagement.
Which brings us to the radical difference of sadness. Yasminn points out that sadness does the exact opposite. It violently drops your physical energy.
It bottoms it out.
Right. It acts as a biological anchor, physically pulling you inward and forcing a total withdrawal from the external world.
And we really have to look at the evolutionary utility of that energy drop. If you are constantly outward focused, if you're always expending energy on surviving, interacting, working, producing, you have zero biological resources left for internal auditing.
So the body literally has to strip away your physical capacity to engage with the world.
Exactly. By making you feel lethargic, heavy, and just wanting to isolate, sadness removes the distractions. High energy states keep you moving on the surface, but sadness stops you in your tracks. It forces you to see the fractures in your internal state that you would otherwise completely ignore if you were just, happy or angry.
It makes me think of a smartphone entering low power mode when the battery hits 10%.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The phone dims the screen. It stops fetching emails in the background. It completely shuts down all non-essential external functions. And it does this to preserve the core operating system.
Yeah.
And when the phone needs to do a major critical software update, it literally bricks the device. The screen goes black, a little loading bar appears, and you cannot make calls, open apps, send texts. The device is telling you, do not touch me, I am reconfiguring my architecture.
And if you try to force the phone to keep working during that update, like if you keep mashing the buttons and trying to bypass the loading screen, you corrupt the hard drive. You literally crash the entire system.
So are we basically corrupting our own hard drives? I mean, our modern obsession is to cure sadness the second it hits.
Yeah.
We try to override that low power mode with constant action.
We definitely do.
We work longer hours. We doom scroll on our phones for hours just to get a dopamine hit. We overschedule our weekends. We're ignoring a vital software update.
We are chemically and behaviorally postponing our own psychological evolution. And the longer you delay an emotional update, the more vulnerable and glitchy the human system becomes. The biological requirement for stasis doesn't simply disappear just because you drank 3 energy drinks and distracted yourself.
It compounds.
Exactly, it compounds.
But the friction here is that our own minds actively fight the update. When this heavy biological sadness hits, the intellect panics. Yasminn describes this as the first layer of sadness. The moment the energy drops, the brain immediately rushes in to create narratives to justify the heavy feeling.
The human intellect is a relentless meaning-making machine. It absolutely despises a vacuum. If the body suddenly initiates this profound sorrowful lethargy, the prefrontal cortex, the logical thinking part of the brain, goes into absolute overdrive. It demands a concrete reason for the sudden drop in energy.
And it almost exclusively searches for external blame.
Yes, always looking outward.
Yasminn notes that we immediately start pointing fingers at our environment. We blame broken expectations. We blame people who let us down. We tell ourselves, I feel this heavy because my friend didn't invite me to dinner, or I'm sad because I didn't get that promotion.
Or, my partner looked at me the wrong way this morning.
Right.
And this discrepancy is vital to understand. There is the raw biological feeling of the sadness, the physical energy drop, and then there is the intellectualization of that feeling, the elaborate story the mind spins to explain the drop.
The story.
Yeah, and Yasminn warns that if you don't have the discipline to sit with the physical emotion long enough, you will mistake this first layer of external blame for the absolute truth of your situation.
So you'll just walk around thinking your life is miserable because your boss is a micromanager, and you'll completely miss the actual biological message your body is trying to deliver.
The story your mind creates is essentially a decoy. It keeps your attention focused outward on the boss or the friend or the traffic jam. It defeats the entire biological purpose of sadness, which again was designed to force you to look inward.
Getting past that decoy story sounds incredibly difficult, though.
It's arguably the hardest part.
But Yasminn argues that if you can sit with the sadness past those initial justifications, if you can just let the blame dissolve, you finally dig down to the root. And the root is almost always about you. It reveals unfulfilled needs, deeply compromised values, or uncomfortable truths about your life that you've been actively running from.
Holding that space requires profound self-awareness. I mean, when your biological battery is drained, your mind will scream 50 different reasons why your discomfort is someone else's fault. But if you can isolate the physical sensation of the sadness...
Like the tightness in the chest?
Yes, the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the limbs, and just let it exist without attaching a narrative to it, the real data surfaces.
And the data usually reveals that you are the only one who can actually fulfill these needs. You realize, oh, I said yes to a project I hated because I wanted validation. Or you realize you neglected your own boundary just to keep the peace in a relationship.
Right.
The external world didn't do this to you. You abandoned your own principles.
And that realization shifts the locus of control entirely back to the individual, which, frankly, the human ego finds deeply offensive.
I was going to ask, is the intellect creating these external blame stories as a literal defense mechanism? It seems like the brain is throwing up smoke screens specifically to protect the ego from the agonizing work of self-reflection.
That aligns precisely with how psychological ego defenses operate. Your ego, your constructed identity, desires to view itself as competent, righteous, in control. Realizing that you are the primary architect of your own misery or unfulfilled needs is a psychic wound.
It hurts.
It does. So the brain offers external blame as an analgesic. It's far less painful to blame the accounting department for your stress than to admit you are terrified of setting a boundary and going home at 5 o'clock.
So the intellect's trap is trying to save you from pain, but in doing so, it freezes the software update at 99%.
Yeah, it stalls out.
You stay trapped in the loop of blaming the outside world. You never address the root cause, and the underlying biological sadness has to keep returning. It just keeps knocking on the door heavier and heavier.
We end up fighting our own cognitive architecture just to allow our physical bodies to process reality. And this leads directly into Yasminn's critique of the mind-body disconnect, which moves us from abstract psychology into the tangible physical biology of emotion.
Right. She ties the biological purpose of sadness directly to how trauma and heavy unprocessed emotions are physically stored in the body.
Yeah.
And she makes a really sharp critique of our modern, hyper-intellectualized approach to healing.
We practically worship the mind.
We do. We operate on this deeply flawed assumption that if we just journal about our trauma for an hour a day, or if we sit and talk therapy for 10 years and map out exactly how our childhood affected us, we'll logically free ourselves from the pain.
We treat the rational mind as the supreme CEO of the human body. We assume that if the CEO understands the spreadsheets and the data, the entire corporation will just magically function flawlessly.
But Yasminn points out that the mind eventually hits a hard ceiling. You can possess a PhD-level understanding of exactly why you were triggered by a certain tone of voice. You can write a dissertation on your own abandonment issues.
Sure.
But the moment you actually hear that tone of voice in the real world, your body still instantly bypasses all that logic and throws you into a full-blown panic attack. The intellectual knowledge does absolutely nothing to stop the physical, visceral reaction.
And the neuroscientific data explaining why this ceiling exists is fascinating. Trauma, raw emotion, and the profound stasis of deep sadness, they do not reside in the prefrontal cortex.
The thinking part.
Right. The prefrontal cortex is the evolutionary newcomer to the brain. It handles language, complex logic, rational thought. It's the part of the brain that writes the journal entries and talks to the therapist.
But the trauma and the heavy emotions live in the lower brain, right? The brainstem and the limbic system.
Yes. These are ancient primal structures. They evolved millions of years before early hominids ever uttered a word. And because they predate language, they literally do not comprehend it.
Wow.
The limbic system only understands the world through sensation, impulse, physical contraction, and expansion. It communicates through your heart rate, the depth of your breath, and the tension in your muscles.
Yasminn details how this translates into the physical storage of overwhelming experiences. When something deeply traumatic or just severely overwhelming occurs, the prefrontal cortex essentially short circuits.
It goes offline.
The mind says, I do not have the processing power for this right now. I just need to survive the next 5 minutes. And because the energy cannot be processed in the moment, the body literally files that emotional kinetic energy away in the physical tissues.
The biology of survival is fiercely pragmatic. If sitting down to process a complex emotion would compromise your ability to escape an immediate threat, the body delays the processing. It locks the physical contraction in place to deal with later.
When she highlights the fascia specifically.
Yes, the fascial network.
For a long time, anatomy books treated fascia as just this inert packing material, like biological bubble wrap.
Right, just stuffed in between the muscles.
But the fascia is actually a continuous, highly innervated web of connective tissue that wraps around every single muscle, bone, and organ in our bodies, from the skull down to the soles of the feet. It's one of the most sensitive sensory organs we possess. When a traumatic event occurs, a massive cocktail of stress chemicals is released directly into the fascia, creating a structural microscopic tightening.
It leaves a literal physical imprint.
A physical imprint of the unexpressed emotion in the tissue web. It's not a poetic metaphor. It is measurable physical tension.
She also zeroes in on the psoas muscle, which is crucial here. The psoas is a massive, deep core muscle that connects the lower spine through the pelvis to the femur. and it's intimately connected to the central nervous system.
Okay, so how does it react to threat?
When we're threatened, the psoas is the primary muscle that violently contracts to pull our knees toward our chest, curling us into a protective fetal position to shield our vital organs.
Oh, wow.
Right. So if the threat passes, but we never physically process or shake out the fear, that psoas muscle stays chronically contracted. It holds onto the phantom danger for years.
So going back to our cultural obsession with outthinking our problems, trying to logic your way out of a deep emotional wound stored in the psoas or the fascia is exactly like trying to open a compressed zip file using a simple word processor.
It's perfectly said. You are utilizing completely incompatible software languages.
You're using the prefrontal cortex, the word processor, to try and communicate with the limbic system and the dense connective tissues, the compressed zip file. It's just going to output meaningless gibberish. The body simply does not understand your articulate journal entry. It only understands slow, intentional movement, deep diaphragmatic breath, and physical release.
And this connects flawlessly back to the biological imperative of sadness and stasis. The prefrontal cortex moves at lightning speed. Logic is incredibly fast.
But the body is slow.
The body is very slow. The limbic system and the fascial network operate on a dense, visceral, plodding frequency. By radically dropping your physical energy, sadness decelerates the entire human system to the speed of the physical body. It forces you to slow down enough that the physical imprints locked in the fascia and the psoas can finally be noticed, felt, and released.
But practically speaking, I know a lot of people listening are feeling a very specific type of resistance right now.
The reality of modern life.
Exactly. If I'm sitting at my desk at the office on a Thursday morning and this heavy biological wave of exhaustion and sadness hits, I cannot just crawl under my desk, enter low power mode, and process my fascial trauma.
No, you'd get fired.
Right. I have a mortgage to pay. I have emails to answer. How does Yasminn suggest we reconcile this biological need for stasis with the relentless demands of modern capitalism? Should we just surrender to the sadness completely and drop out of society?
Well, no, and Yasminn introduces a very strict boundary here. She is advocating for the profound necessity of sitting with sadness, but she explicitly warns against the danger of sinking into a depressive loop.
And we should clarify, she's not discussing clinical chemical depression here, right?
Absolutely not. Clinical depression requires medical intervention. She is talking about a behavioral, emotional loop where you allow the heavy energy to paralyze you entirely.
It's the difference between taking your car in for maintenance and leaving it to rest in a junkyard. You can sink so deep into the withdrawal that you disconnect from reality, stop paying your bills, and alienate everyone around you.
The stasis is a temporary diagnostic tool, not a permanent residence. You must welcome the sadness for the vital data it brings, and you must allow it to slow you down. But simultaneously, you have to engage your conscious agency.
You have to force small mechanical actions.
Yes. Getting out of bed, taking a shower, answering a few necessary emails, these things tether you to the world and protect you from sinking into a void you can't climb out of.
Because if you leave the phone in low power mode forever without ever plugging it back in, the battery eventually just dies.
Exactly. Yasminn frames this beautifully by calling deep, paralyzing sadness life's last resort.
The emergency fail-safe mechanism.
Precisely. You do not naturally require a catastrophic, bedridden depression to alter the course of your life.
Yeah.
When you reach that point of profound stasis, it is only because you spent months or years ignoring the earlier, much subtler biological signals.
You miss the warnings.
You sprinted through life in a high-energy state, ignoring the slight tension in your gut when you walked into work. You ignored the quiet voice of your intuition. You ignored the fact that your core values were being eroded daily.
You ignored the check engine light for 10,000 miles, so the biology has no choice but to completely seize the engine on the highway, just to get you to stop driving.
Which forces us to confront how modern environments manufacture this exact crisis. If our environment demands constant digital distraction and ceaseless movement, we are structurally guaranteed to miss the subtle signals.
We're basically asking for it.
We are practically mandating that our biology must resort to the emergency brake just to get our attention.
So how do we stop forcing our bodies into the last resort? Yasminn proposes a highly practical, proactive solution: the life audit.
It's essentially a methodology for simulated stasis.
Simulated stasis, I like that. Instead of waiting for a breakdown, you consciously choose to stop and audit your life on a regular schedule, perhaps once a month or every 2 months. Imagine actually doing this. You clear Sunday afternoon, you turn off your phone.
Crucial step, turning off the phone.
Right. You sit down with a physical notebook and you ruthlessly analyze the major pillars of your life. You look at your career, your romantic relationships, your friendships, your physical health, your creative output. And you don't just look at the logistics, you document your visceral feelings about each area.
You are intentionally dropping your own energy to the speed of the body before the body forces you to. You ask yourself, where do I feel physical constriction when I think about my job? Where are my boundaries consistently being ignored by a friend? What values am I compromising just to maintain my current lifestyle?
It's preventative maintenance. You are actively choosing to enter a brief period of stasis, gather the raw data from your limbic system, and make microscopic adjustments to your trajectory. You realize, I resent my partner because I haven't asked for what I need, and you fix it on a Tuesday rather than waiting 3 years until the suppressed resentment physically incapacitates you.
But culturally, we view sitting quietly with a notebook for 3 hours as unproductive time.
We feel guilty doing it.
We really do. We have to reframe that life audit, not as a loss of productivity, but as essential navigational maintenance that prevents a total systemic collapse.
The biology, the physical storage in the fascia, the proactive life audits, this is all highly practical. But Yasminn pushes this deep dive into incredibly profound, almost unsettling philosophical territory to close out her thesis on sadness. She introduces a concept from the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan.
Ah, yes, the idea of manque.
Which translates to the lack.
This elevates the conversation from the functional utility of emotions into the inescapable existential reality of the human condition.
She posits that underneath the situational sadness, underneath the bad days at work or the breakups, there is a baseline level of emptiness, a subtle humming sadness that is simply innate to being a human being.
It's not a glitch.
Exactly, it's not a glitch. It's not unresolved trauma. It is baked into the hardware of human consciousness.
Lacan argued that to be a conscious self is to be inherently incomplete, and Yasminn describes humans as barely conscious animals.
That phrase hit me hard. Barely conscious animals.
We need to unpack the evolutionary weight of that. For millions of years, we were just primates operating on pure instinct eating, reproducing, surviving in the present moment. And then, evolutionarily speaking, in the blink of an eye, the neocortex exploded in size.
We woke up.
We suddenly woke up with a staggering capacity for abstract thought. We gained the ability to project ourselves into the future, to contemplate our own mortality, and to realize just how infinitesimally small we are in a vast, indifferent universe.
We are animals burdened with the awareness of our own ending, navigating a life where we have very little actual control and absolutely zero objective answers as to why we are even here.
That massive cognitive leap creates a permanent, subtle psychic ache. The human mind can imagine perfection, infinity, and total completion, but it is trapped in a finite, flawed, decaying biological form.
It's quite a predicament.
It is. That gap between what we can conceptualize and what we actually experience is Lacan's manque. It is a void in the center of our being.
But our modern culture absolutely, violently rejects this idea. We are bombarded with messaging that insists we are supposed to be 100% whole, perpetually happy, and completely fulfilled.
It's a toxic expectation.
Yasminn argues that the ultimate emotional maturity is making peace with this baseline human sadness. We have to accept the void. Because if we refuse to accept that a subtle ache is just the price of admission for human consciousness, we will spend our entire lives desperately trying to fill it with external objects.
If you reject the internal reality of the manque, you externalize the solution. You become a frantic consumer trying to buy your way out of existential dread.
You look for the mythical other half in a romantic relationship, placing this impossible crushing burden on another flawed human being to magically complete your soul.
Which never works.
No. You chase corporate titles, you hoard money, you buy things you don't need, or you fall into endless dopamine loops of scrolling and consuming. You do all of this just to momentarily numb the buzzing ache of that innate emptiness.
And it is a fundamentally unwinnable battle. The void cannot be filled by acquiring a new car or a new partner because the void is structural. It is the literal shape of human consciousness. Trying to fill the manque with external objects is like trying to fill a black hole with handfuls of sand.
Think about the staggering implications of that. How much of our modern consumer culture, how much of our entire global economic engine is built entirely on our collective refusal to accept this baseline human emptiness?
Almost all of it, honestly.
Are we constantly buying, striving, and distracting ourselves simply because we are terrified of sitting quietly in a room and facing our own inherent lack?
If a critical mass of society simply accepted the mank, if we made friends with that subtle, humming sadness and stopped trying to cure it, an enormous portion of our manufactured desires would evaporate overnight.
Entire industries would collapse.
They would. The urgency for constant stimulation disappears when you stop running from your own structural emptiness.
We have covered some incredibly dense and muddy waters today. To distill the key takeaways from Yasminn's philosophies, the central thesis requires a complete paradigm shift. Sadness is not a failure.
No.
It's not an inconvenience, and it is not a disease to be immediately eradicated by action.
It is a highly evolved, vital biological mechanism. It drops your physical energy to pull you out of the superficial rush of the external world, forcing you into the stasis required to confront the unfulfilled values your intellect is hiding behind stories and blame.
And we cannot outthink this process. The body physically stores emotional data in ancient pre-verbal tissues like the fascia and the limbic system.
Those systems only respond to slowness, physical presence, and the cessation of logic.
Right. And while we have to guard against letting that stasis paralyze us permanently, avoiding the slowdown entirely guarantees that our biology will eventually pull the emergency brake, we have to proactively audit our lives to catch the whispers before they become screams.
And ultimately, we must surrender to the inherent existential ache of being a conscious animal in a vast universe. It is an invitation to finally stop waging war on our own biology and start listening to its wisdom.
So, to you listening to this right now, the next time a wave of heavy emotion washes over you, the next time that inexplicable urge to cry surfaces in your car, or that profound heavy lethargy sets in on a Tuesday afternoon, no ellipses. The next time that heavy lethargy sets in on a Tuesday afternoon, what are you going to do?
Will you scramble to fix it?
Exactly. Will you blame your vitamins, your coworkers, or your schedule? Will you instantly reach into your pocket for your phone to numb the sensation with a digital dopamine hit? Or will you actually let it drop your energy?
Will you sit in the uncomfortable silence?
Will you look past the decoy stories your intellect is screaming at you and finally listen to the vital system update your biology is desperately trying to install?
The choice to accept the update is entirely yours.
But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your own. We have established today that sadness, stillness, and emotional stasis are highly evolved biological tools absolutely necessary for human realignment and healing.
Yes.
If that is true, what happens to an entire society that structurally, digitally, and medically suppresses these emotions at a mass scale? By pathologizing the biological energy drop and culturally demanding a state of constant high-vibration productivity, are we chemically and behaviorally postponing our own evolution as a species?
It's a heavy question.
It is. Just like we said at the very beginning, when you step into the world of human emotion, the X-ray machine is useless. You cannot just point to the white line and fix the problem. You have to be willing to sit in the muddy waters, let the human system power down, and trust that the darkness is doing exactly what it was designed to do.